Hello and welcome to the FSF podcast. I am Tim. I am your host. And as a reminder, you have found your way to the show that is made by nerds for nerds. So we are glad to have you here in said nerdery. Today, our guest is someone who has been around the nerd community for quite some time. He's the founder of both the Star Wars and the Star Trek official fan clubs. He's the founder of Star Wars Celebration and even has a cameo in the Phantom Menace. You will find him there as well. But he's also a writer. He's a well-respected publicist and marketing consultant for those brands like Star Wars and Star Trek. He's also worked with Back to the Future, Lord of the Rings, and many others. I am very excited to welcome Dan Madsen to the show today. Hey, Dan, welcome to the FSF podcast.
Thanks, Tim. Nice to be here.
Thank you. So one of the things that I always love to do, and because it is the fact that now, typically there's myself and my co-host, Ben and Kathleen, but they weren't able to make it tonight. But we like to say that this is a show made by nerds for nerds because we're all three nerds and we enjoy nerdy, cool things and people who do nerdy, cool things. And you have done a lot of cool, nerdy things. And one of the things that we love to start every episode with is an origin story because, again, being nerds love a good origin story.
Amen.
So, in the origin story of Dan Madsen, how'd you get here? What happened where you went, you know what? I need to do this. And how did that happen?
Well, as a child, I grew up reading comic books. I was a big fan of comics, superheroes, and all of that. I hadn't gotten really interested in Star Trek, to be honest, until one day in junior high, actually. I was walking home from school. And for those in your audience may or may not know, I'm a little person. So I stand about 4'2" tall. Have probably stood that tall all my life, basically, since junior high. And I was walking home from junior high school one day. My house was about 2.5, 3 blocks from my middle school. And as I was walking home, there were some kids on the other side of the street walking the same direction, and they kept making fun of me. They were yelling at me and calling me shrimp and hey, midget, and just really kind of being mean. And as kids do, that's just the way kids are. But it was really upsetting me that day, and I had to endure that the whole way home. So by the time I got home, I was really almost in tears. I was just so, upset that I couldn't just walk home and quietly and not have people do that to me. Anyway, I walked in the house and my brother's sitting on the couch watching TV, and I sat down and he knew there was something wrong with me, and he said, "What's the matter?" And I said, "Nothing." And so he happened to be watching on that day a rerun of Star Trek. I'd never watched Star Trek ever before. I had no interest in watching Star Trek, but on that day, that's what he had on the TV. So I sat down and I decided to just watch it and try to get my mind off of what was troubling me. And lo and behold, on this particular day, there was an episode of Star Trek on that's called Plato's Stepchildren. And in this episode, there's a little person. Michael Dunn was the name of the actor. He played Dr. Lovelace on The Wild Wild West as well. And he was on this planet. He was the only little person on the planet. And they had these kind of magical powers that they could make people do things with, and they could move objects and such. But Alexander couldn't do that. He was kind of their slave, so to speak. He would be the one that have to go get this or go get that. At any rate, when I came into this episode, Alexander was sitting there or standing there, and Kirk was sitting on a bench, and Alexander looks Kirk in the eyes and he says, "What's it like where you come from?" Because Alexander did not like where he lived. And Kirk said, "Alexander, where I come from, size, shape, or color makes no difference." And it was like a light bulb going off in my head, Tim. I just couldn't, at that moment, after coming home from, being mocked the whole way home just because I was little, and watching that episode, and I thought, wow, what would it be like to live in a world like that? And then as the episode went on, by the end of the episode, Kirk and Spock and McCoy decided to let Alexander come with them. And so when they got ready to go, Kirk opened up his communicator and said to Scotty, "Scotty, 4 to beam up." And he looked down and gave Alexander a big smile, and Alexander gave Kirk a big grin because he knew he was going to get to go with them. And I just remember thinking after that episode was over, I thought, man, I want to go there. I want to be able to go beam up onto the Enterprise. I want to live in a world where people don't judge me by what's on the outside, but what the content of my character, by what's inside. And I became a lifelong Star Trek fan after that. I watched every episode. I had posters and pictures plastered all over my bedroom wall. And, you know, in a way, that world did exist for me, Tim, because when I went to my very first Star Trek convention here in Denver, I walked in there and there was nobody making fun of me or staring at me or pointing at me. Everybody accepted me like just because I was who I was. We were all Star Trek fans. And in fact, there were some people much stranger looking than me dressed as Klingons and Romulans and everything. So I felt right at home there. And I just remember thinking, wow, this community really does follow what the show says. And that was really how I started my whole fandom time frame. I became a massive Star Trek fan and just watched and read and collected everything I could about it. And as the first Star Trek movie came out, I decided to start a fan club, kind of more or less kind of centered on that first movie. And it took off, and I started getting a lot of members in it, and I got a job in a print shop and learned how to make my newsletter look even more professional. And it just happened to end up at Paramount Studios and in the hands of Gene Roddenberry. And Gene and I became friends, and he would write me letters all the time. And Paramount decided to license me and let me be the official Star Trek fan club. And so I did that for quite a few years. And in about 1987, I got a call from George Lucas and Howard Rothman from Lucasfilm, and they had just closed down their fan club for Star Wars, and they liked what I was doing for Star Trek, and said, "Come out to Skywalker Ranch. Let's talk about maybe you taking over and doing the fan club." They'd never let anybody do it outside of the company. It was always done in-house. So I went out there. We had a great meeting, and the next thing, one thing leads to another, and I got the license and I became the official Star Wars Lucasfilm fan club. And that went on for years and years until as the prequels came on. And then we decided it was time to do a convention for Star Wars to tie in with the first episode 1 prequel. And we flew out to Skywalker Ranch. We had a big meeting about what would it be. And as a result of that meeting, the Star Wars Celebration was born. So, yeah, it's been a whirlwind trip. It hasn't been quick. It's been over many years that my fandom has developed. But as a result of my Star Trek and Star Wars success, I had the opportunity to do the fan clubs for Back to the Future, as you mentioned in the intro, and Lord of the Rings. And all that entails, getting to go to the set and meeting the actors and the production and creative people. Cool. And yeah, it's been an amazing life. And I've often told my wife, I said, I have no regrets. What I've been able to do is live a fan's dream. And I have. I mean, I never imagined I would get to do all the things I got to do and get to meet my heroes and such when I was a kid. So it's been an amazing journey.
Yeah, absolutely. You've lived the fan's dream. I mean, everything that I've read about you, the things I've seen, that you've been involved with, there hasn't been one thing where I went, no, I don't think I would have wanted to do that as a fan. And you talk about, for me, so I'm for myself, my own personal fandom, I've only recently in the last couple of years really started to get into Star Trek. I had vaguely, or most, I should say, not vaguely, but mostly by and large ignored Star Trek for the majority of my years. kind of looked down and over my nose as a Star Wars fan. Just kind of went, no, that's Trek. It's fine. There's no laser swords. I don't need to talk about them. And mistakenly so, because I've in the last about 4 to 5 years, I've really enjoyed, and I've gone back through and started watching Star Trek and really getting into it and enjoying it. But when you said that, because being such a big Star Wars fan, you mentioned, going to Skywalker Ranch, and I would have been a puddle. And I know I would have been. That's one of the things on this show. I've had the opportunity to, like you talked about, meet some of your heroes and talk to people that, that you had admired and things along those lines. And I've had an opportunity to try not to fanboy on camera. And I won't say that I've been 100% successful. So just go see the Sam Witwer interview and you'll see exactly what I mean. But Sam was very gracious.
He's a great guy, Sam. Oh yeah.
Yeah. But I've had these opportunities over here, and I think about all that, and it's like, wow, you've had an amazing career. So just like you said, you have lived every fan's dream. But I did have a point to this rambling, and I'm going to circle back to it, I promise.
Sure.
It's not very often, though, that we get somebody on the show who's nearly or equally as a fan of both of the two massive properties, both Star Wars and Star Trek. Usually there's one, and to pardon the pun, but light years ahead of the other.
Sure.
As far as the fandoms go, but that doesn't seem to be the case here. This seems, for me, if we're looking at what you're doing and everything I've read about you, it seems that these two things, there may be, one that pulls out a little bit here, but they kind of run neck and neck with you, it seems. And I'm certainly not asking you to, as a father, to look down and pick between your children, which one you like best. But what aspect, you talked about what the aspect of what drew you to Star Trek, but what aspect of Star Wars drew you to it, and what keeps you going back to both fandoms?
Well, that's interesting. Star Trek, I told you the story of how I was introduced to that, and how that went on. But the minute 1977 rolled around, and my cousin had gone to see Star Wars the first week it opened, and said, "Oh my God, you have got to come with me. You will not believe this movie." And so he got me in the car. He was considerably older than me, and he took me to go see Star Wars. And I mean, from the moment, as I've heard of so many other fans talk about, the moment that Star Destroyer comes over your head and it just keeps going and going and going. I was just absolutely, completely enraptured by the whole thing, and it just watching every moment. And I mean, it's such a good movie. I watched it just not long ago, that original Star Wars, and it's just, it holds up. It lasts. It's such a classic and amazingly well-made movie. Everything about it just seems perfect. And I fell in love with Star Wars. So I came home, and weeks and months after that, I started taking down half of my Star Trek posters and putting Star Wars posters on my bedroom wall, because I knew I had another thing that I loved just as much. And so Star Wars became such a passion for me. And that's why it's interesting, because I told you the story of how I started the Star Trek Club. But I was probably one of the very first people who joined the official Star Wars fan club back in 1978 when it first launched, that was run in-house by Lucasfilm. And when I came time to do my Star Trek club, at the time the Star Trek No Motion Picture came out, I kept thinking, why isn't there, I knew there were local clubs all over, but why isn't there one big official fan club for Star Trek that's like Star Wars? Star Wars has this really cool newsletter, Bantha Tracks, and you get this amazing membership kit and everything. And I kept thinking there should be something like that for Star Trek. And that was the inspiration for me going forward and trying to do something for Star Trek. And one thing after another led to me becoming official and blessed by Gene Roddenberry. But so when the call came in about 87 to do the Lucasfilm Star Wars fan club, I was like, I couldn't believe it. I mean, I was like, this is incredible. I'm a huge Star Wars fan as well. And so after I got out to Skywalker Ranch and we had a good meeting and a good chat, they decided, well, we should launch it first as Lucasfilm, because Star Wars, they had it at that time, Tim, they had no idea when, if ever, George would actually get back to making Star Wars movies. He had said he wanted to, but each year would pass and there wasn't anything. So there was no 100% assurance that there was ever going to be any new Star Wars movies. And so on the plate, they had me covering and going forward in the Lucasfilm Fan Club magazine for the fan club was, to start off was Willow, which I loved, and spent a couple of weeks on the set in England interviewing the whole cast and crew for that. Became good friends with Warwick Davis and still am to this day. And then after that, went right into Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade. Spent a couple of weeks on the set of that over in England, and then covered a few other little things they were doing here and there. But I kept saying to him, geez, when's George getting back to Star Wars? And then I finally got, a call and a message saying George is sitting down, he's writing the very first prequel, and he hopes to have it in a couple of years. This was in I don't know, it was the early 90s that I first got word that George was serious about doing some new Star Wars movies. And so, that just, I knew that the minute he got back to doing Star Wars, that the fan club would just skyrocket.
Sure.
And as a kid, once again, the whole little person short thing, when Empire Strikes Back came out, I was so moved and influenced by Yoda saying, look at, judge me by my size, do you? And here's this little tiny guy, and yet he was the toughest of all the Jedis. He was the most powerful, and there was a message in that, and it wasn't lost on me. And so that, once again, both of these franchises have spoken to me in many ways. As a little person, there's a message in both of them, and they each are inspirational. And I'm proud to have been a part of them in any way possible.
That's an excellent answer. For me, one of the biggest draws back into Star Trek is that I love the fact that it's similar in Star Wars to some ways to me, but I love the fact where it's so very opposite that it instills hope.
Oh, absolutely.
And that was something that I hadn't caught on to as a younger man, because I was so caught up in the fact that they were like, well, how exciting can it be? They're not even blowing up ships. I mean, come on, they're just talking to people and they're doing space science. Woohoo.
Yep.
So I like I said, I completely looked down my nose, just kind of like, it can't be that good. But I have really grown to appreciate the hope that Star Trek instills.
It does. And they both, both franchises deal with that hope and having heroes to look up to, good versus bad. And they're both, and they're both, so different. I mean, Star Wars is probably is more fantasy, whereas Star Trek is more science fiction. But, it's, they're both such legendary franchises now that 100 years from now, people will still be talking about them.
Oh, for sure. Yeah. I don't think that these are things that are going to go away anytime soon. They've already proven, especially with Trek, that there's a longevity there. And I love the fact that both of these franchises are finding ways to branch out and go out into different areas and talk about different things, especially with Trek, so you've got the new show, Strange New Worlds, and that's fantabulous. And I love that show so very much. And, Star Wars has its new shows coming out and different things. And I love the fact that with Star Wars that we're starting to kind of branch away from the Skywalker name a little bit. And we're getting out to some of these outlying stories and these outlying worlds and things. And so I'm very excited about what the possibility of future stories in Star Wars can be.
Now think back to when, not for Star Trek for you, because you hadn't been into it way back, but when back in the early days when I had just started getting into Star Trek, and for many years, the thought of all these new different Star Trek shows that have been out, and plethora of movies and such,
right?
That didn't exist then, and all there was 3 seasons of the original show. that was Star Trek. That's it. That's all there was. And
Right.
so if you had told me then, oh, you know what, 20, 30 years from now, there's going to be, 8, 9, 10 Star Trek movies, and there's going to be 4 or 5 different Star Trek TV shows. And I would have said, what? You got to be kidding me. And the same with Star Wars. I mean,
Oh, for sure.
after
Yeah.
Return of the Jedi, I mean, I thought, well, that's probably it. That's all we're going to get, but if you had told me, 20 years later, you're going to get how many different Star Wars shows on Disney Plus that you're going to watch?
Oh, for sure. Yeah.
Just about Obi-Wan Kenobi and just about, other characters, a Boba Fett show all about him.
Yeah.
And a whole nother set of movies and series of prequels and sequels. And that's what I'm saying. It's like today I look back at my younger self and I think, man, if I could have gone back and said, man, you have no idea how much Star Trek and Star Wars stuff you're going to get when you're older. You will not believe how much stuff is going to be coming your way.
Yeah. It's almost an embarrassment of riches right now.
It is.
It is.
That's true. That's exactly right.
And it's amazing. And I love, I mean, it doesn't mean that I'm not critical of some of the things that come out as a fan. I go, well, I don't know about that choice. But I'm so thankful that we have them, and I'm so thankful that there's an opportunity because whereas I may not enjoy it wholeheartedly, I know that somebody else very well does. And I've talked to a couple of different people on different shows where it wasn't my thing, but they loved it. So you know what? I'm not going to yuck their yum. I'm going to let them enjoy their fun. And if that's what got them into the fandom, by gosh, let's go with it and let them have some fun,
Absolutely. I'm just like that. I mean, I don't love everything that Star Trek has produced to this day, as well as Star Wars. Some of the stuff I've watched it all, but some of it I may not ever watch again because it wasn't my thing. I wasn't that really into it. I didn't like it as much. And other stuff I thought was fantastic. So, that's the thing is that there's so much to choose from that what you love is not necessarily what I'm going to love. And so, we all start back at the original, but then we look at all these different things that are coming down the pike and that have been, and it opens up a whole new universe for the fan base because everybody has something they can love, and things that they don't love, well, that's all right. Just pass over that and watch the things you do.
That's right. That's right. Okay, so Dan, one of the things we mentioned in the outset of this is that you've had worked with the brands like Star Wars and Star Trek, but we also mentioned Back to the Future and Lord of the Rings, and your career has been intertwined with a lot of these different things. But currently, one of the companies that I see that you've been working with is Her Universe, a clothing line for the female fandom. Yeah. So I was hoping that you would take a moment and explain what's so special about Her Universe and why it's so different from other brands.
Well, I'll tell you what's special about Her Universe, and it's 2 words: Ashley Eckstein. She is one of the most incredible people I have ever known. I met Ashley, the former head of licensing at Paramount that I worked with on the Star Trek franchise, was hired by Ashley to be a consultant to help her launch Her Universe many, many years ago. I don't know how many years, 15 years ago it is now, I think. I don't know. At any rate, Ashley was trying to think, well, how can I reach out with my brand to all of the fan bases that love Star Wars? Because Star Wars was what she started out with. And so Andrea says, I know just the guy for you. I'm going to put you together with Dan because he's run the fan club. He knows the fan clubs. He knows the fan base. And so Andrea set up a meeting between Ashley and I. And I met Ashley, and she was just fantastic. And I went to work with her shortly after that. And between her and Andrea, helped her launch Her Universe many, many years ago. And it was always her vision, she always wanted to have a fashion line that spoke to women and young girls. There was so much out there that was primarily based for boys and men. And but after we started doing some research, even in the very early years of Her Universe, we started to come to the realization that 50% of all fans in both Star Wars and Star Trek fandoms are women. And that, in the early days, people thought, well, Star Trek, Star Wars, that's a boys' club, but not at all. And then today, it's not at all like that at all. You go to a convention, and there are more women than men at these conventions, and
Oh yeah.
and it was a Ashley kind of set the whole thing in motion. There are other brands now that are doing, Star Wars and Star Trek fashion lines and such, but the first and the best will always be her universe and Ashley Eckstein. And Ashley's passion you could see through the whole everything she did. And I mean, we launched so many different lines. I mean, we did lines for Star Wars, Star Trek, Doctor Who, The Walking Dead. What else did we do? We did Studio Ghibli, Battlestar Galactica. Star Wars and Star Trek were always as they are in the sci-fi world, the main things, but there were other ones that came along. And she's just and that's why her portrayal of Ahsoka on the animated shows has been so popular, because not only was it so well written and done by Dave Filoni, but Ashley just brought out the spirit of Ahsoka in that character.
Oh, for sure.
And the way she reaches out to the fans, Tim, I don't know if you've ever been to a convention with her, even to this day, she draws the largest crowds of anybody I've ever seen at these conventions. You go to a Star Wars celebration and you look at the lines of people lined up to get autographs from, and she sometimes doubles those of some of the classic bigger Star Wars actors that you would not imagine.
Right,
Ashley's line is longer, and she stays to the very end. And she might be the last one in the whole room, signing autograph. Everybody else has left, but she'll stay there until every fan gets an autograph. And
that's cool.
Yeah, it's her passion and her vision that made her universe such a unique fashion line, and such unique designs and dresses and skirts and scarves and tops. And after working with Ashley for about 12 years, I never imagined I would know so much about women's clothes, but I did, because it was my job to market and promote all these lines. So I got to know all the different kinds of dresses and the different kinds of skirts. And I never imagined I would know so much about women's clothes.
Well, if you're going to promote it, you got to know it.
You got to know it. Absolutely.
You got to do your research. You got to know what you're talking about.
That's right.
Well, I will say for sure that Ashley is on she's one of my bucket list interviews. I would absolutely just adore to talk with her. She's because of some of the things that you mentioned, and I've seen this in other Star Wars Celebration interviews that she's done. Her own live shows on Instagram, watching her and how she interacts with the fans and talks with people, and she's just one of those people that you imagine that she is, pretty much she is what you see.
She's completely everything you see is Ashley. She's 100% authentic, and and
you gotta love that.
Yeah, she's just and her husband David, who's a star in his own right as a baseball player. They're a power couple that is just amazing, and the nicest people you'll ever meet. Just really, literally, you might hear people say that. Now, I really mean it. They are the nicest people I have ever known.
That's awesome. I remember when getting exposed to her universe line. And I remember looking at it going, this is some really cool stuff, man. That's awesome. Wow. And going through it, and so I'm a bigger dude. I'm 6'3" and not a thin mint. So but going through and looking for I'm like, well, where's that in my size? Dang it, that's cool. I want that. There's been several things that I've seen in her universe line where I was like, if that was in my size, I would totally 100% rock that.
We got so many requests from men that she started adding, a line
Yeah.
for men and boys. So there are stuff now on heruniverse.com
Yeah.
that appeal that is made just for, they're unisex. They're made for men or women.
Yeah. Yeah. Back in the early days though, when that first came out, boy, I was so disappointed in some of those things. I think she was wearing, I think she was promoting it, and I think she was, I want to say she was wearing an Ahsoka hoodie.
Oh yeah. Yeah. Well, that was enormously popular. And there were guys buying that too, because it was so cool. The Ahsoka hoodie, that was one of our best selling pieces. One of my favorites, and I don't wear skirts, so I couldn't buy it.
Well, I mean,
I guess I could, but it was she made this incredible, it was a skirt, lightsaber skirt, and it had different colored lightsabers going up and down the skirt. And I mean, that thing was probably one of our best sellers for years upon years. That thing was sold in Hot Topic and other places. And that was one of, I think it to this day, even though I'm still not working on Her Universe right now, I still think that probably is one of the best selling items Her Universe ever had.
I don't doubt it. Yeah. Between that and the hoodie, those are,
oh yeah.
I do remember seeing the lightsaber skirt. And like you, I wasn't going to wear it, but it was cool. But there's
the hoodie though. That's funny you mentioned the Ahsoka hoodie, because that was one of the coolest items, and that was bought by so many people, and men and boys were buying that too, because it didn't scream feminine. You could be a boy or a girl and wear that. So and
you said to be an Ahsoka fan, and it worked for both sides.
Absolutely. Easily. Absolutely.
Yeah. And to your point earlier, you were talking about, the number of women at cons. So I haven't been to a con where I almost just said where Ahsoka is, but where Ashley is. So I help work at a couple different Comic-Cons here in Michigan, and one of them is called the Monroe Comic-Con, and I help run the panel room and moderate panels and everything there. And even in the panel rooms, the women usually are outnumbering the men in the panel rooms 2 to 1.
Mm-hmm. I mean, it's even more so today than it was back when we first started Her Universe.
Yeah. So I love the fact that and also because I also have a daughter, and I've said this in multiple other interviews, I want her to have their same opportunity at Fandom and all the things that I've encountered and been encouraged by my whole fandom life. Yeah. I want her to have those same opportunities, and to find her Luke Skywalker or Han Solo, whoever that may be, man or woman, and have that opportunity to have that person to look up to. And I love the fact that there are lines that are specifically designed to encourage that and build that and help just really nestle that deep down into the soul here for our women and our young ladies to be able to go look at and go, you know what, I'm part of this universe too, and I can
absolutely. No, everybody's welcome in the Star Wars universe, and you can see that in even in the merchandising of the franchise now. I mean,
for sure,
there's plenty there for everyone. It doesn't matter what sex you are, and it's I mean it's and all the strong female characters that have been developed over the years in the Star Wars. I mean, from Princess Leia and Ahsoka Tano on and on, right up to today's the latest characters. There's so many strong female characters that that people can look up to, and Daisy Ridley's character is especially one of those. It's a great universe for young girls to become involved in and to be passionate about, just as it was for me as a young boy getting into it.
Agreed. All right, Dan, with all of that in your background, somehow you also found some time to do some writing, which is just impressive to me, because you seem like you should have been busy with so many other things that writing shouldn't have an opportunity. But you were writing articles on the official websites for Star Wars and Star Trek. You also wrote your own book, the Young Indiana Jones book. And I understand that you're working on a memoir entitled
Yeah.
Size Matters Not. And I love that
Yep.
title. I think that's fantastic. Especially now that I know a little bit more about your background and your backstory. I think that that's a beautiful title. So my question here for you is, what do you enjoy most about writing, whether an article or a book form? And do you have a preference of doing one style over the other?
I like writing an article. I mean, the book is painful to do because it's for me. I can't. I mean, I'm not. I don't speak for other people who are writing, but it's a, to try to come up with, an entire book that's interesting, that, and chapters upon chapters. I love writing an article so that I can start at the beginning and get to the end. The best part of it is when it's done, and you can sit back and look at it and say, okay, that's not bad. And then you send it off to whoever's going to publish it, and they say, hey, that's great, we love it, and I said, well, edit it however you want. Well, it's yours now, so you do what you want. And then when you finally read it, they haven't changed hardly anything in it. And that was how it was when I was running the fan clubs, because I did the magazines, and for the longest time I was the editor, and then I put other people involved. John Snyder became the editor of Star Wars Insider, and I moved up to publisher, but I'd still look at everything and read things and help design the magazine and such. And so I knew how exciting it was for writers, especially first-time writers, to submit something and have it get published in the magazine. And
for sure,
it was a great feeling to see how excited they were when the magazine came out. It's like, oh my God, my article is in the Star Wars Insider. And I still see that. I still see that today. I still see young people who are just starting out in writing, and I see them post something on Facebook or something, and they go, it's here. I just got my new Star Wars Insider in the mail, and my first article is here. And it's a thrill to see them so excited about it, because, I remember that. I remember when I was that way as well. And hopefully that won't be the first and the last. They'll have many more opportunities to write for the Star Wars Insider.
That's awesome. Yeah, a couple years back, I started writing for a website called Couch Soup.
Oh yeah, I've heard of it.
Yeah, okay. And so I've been writing for Couch Soup for a little while, and I still feel that way every time I submit an article. And
Cool.
they tell me that, hey, this article's going to be published and on this date, and here's the and every time I'm like I'll get on and I'm like, click refresh. Click refresh. There it is. Okay.
That's an exciting, and I'm the same way.
Is.
I do the same thing.
Yeah, I've enjoyed. It's funny for me because now years ago I never thought that I would be doing anything with writing at anywhere at any time. I never really saw myself as a writer, but I've found that for me, writing is a nice release. It gives me an opportunity to share my thoughts and feelings in a different way, in a different form, a different fashion. And it's just been a whole lot of fun for me. I've not, I don't think I'll ever try anything book related, but
never say never.
I've had a couple people tell me that. Well, you said never. I'm like, well, yeah, I'm pretty sure. They said, well, you also said you never write on a website. I'm like, well, you got me there. So
yeah, you know what? I mean, you just never know what might happen. So I would say don't rule it out.
Okay. But so we mentioned that you're working on the memoir entitled Size Matters Not. When do you anticipate that you'll have that for people's reading pleasure?
There's been delays upon delays because of me. But my goal is this fall.
Okay.
We'll see if I stick to that.
Yeah, because I saw the potential cover art when I was doing research on all things Dan Madsen, and that was one of the first things that showed up on the interwebs was a nice cover art of what the potential cover art might look like, and I thought that was pretty cool. And so looking forward to that. I think it's going to be a fun read based on everything we've talked about tonight.
Yeah, there's lots of stories in there that I've never told anybody, and behind the scenes things on everything from Star Wars and Star Trek to Back to the Future and Lord of the Rings and Indiana Jones and Willow and
Yeah.
just so many thing and convention stories and meeting celebrities that were my idols as a child and uh, meeting Steven Spielberg and George Lucas and and building a friendship with Anthony Daniels, and it's just so many things in there, and the struggles we went through to put that first Star Wars Celebration out there. I mean, there's a whole story behind that alone. That's a whole book by itself, let me tell you.
I bet. Yeah, yeah, I'll be one of those looking forward to getting that when it comes out.
Absolutely.
All right, Dan, we are at the point of our show where we like to ask what we call our silly question. So the purpose of this question came about, or the reason why this question came about, rather, was that my co-host Kathleen was out with her daughter. Her daughter's, I think she's 5, almost 6. Yeah, 5, almost 6. And I should know, but anyway, they were out and about, and somebody asked her daughter this question, but not her. And Kathleen said, "Well, I don't think there's a time when this question should never be asked of adults." So that question is, Dan Madsen, what's your favorite dinosaur?
Oh, that's a good one. And I loved dinosaurs as a kid. I mean, I built model kits of dinosaurs. I would have to say, I have to go with what probably most people would say, and that's the T-Rex, only because I just thought he was so, I mean, and even going back to the Jurassic Park movies, especially that first one, when that T-Rex comes up to the car and just it roars and you see his giant mouth and his little itty bitty tiny front hands, yeah, I would have to say, that T-Rex is probably my favorite, only because he's just so badass and so cool. And it's and funny. I happened to be with a good friend from Australia. We were up here in Denver and Morrison, up in the mountains, and there's a dinosaur museum up there. And we were up there. We were up there touring the museum, and happened to bump into what do they call a paleontologist? Is that a dinosaur guy? Yeah, paleontologist. Who worked as a consultant on Jurassic Park, and he's written many books about dinosaurs, and he was up there, and it was incredible that we got to just bump into him and we met him, and they were selling one of his paperback novels, and he signed it for me, and he signed it to my friend Greg, and we got to talk to him all about dinosaurs, and he was the one that told me that, and it was just about this time, this was years ago, that they realized that some of the dinosaurs that we think of today as, scaly like a reptile today, that they had feathers on them, and that they were more bird-like in some ways, that they had red and blue and green feathers on them, including T-Rex. And so that was fascinating to me, that the dinosaurs actually, and that goes in line with, everybody, they tell us today that birds are the descendants of dinosaurs. And so it's cool now that they believe that many dinosaurs had feathers, and that's something that we didn't actually envision years and years ago. So yeah, I'd have to say T-Rex, though. I mean, I know that's kind of a pat answer, but that's the truth. He's my favorite.
Hey, it doesn't matter what it is. That's your favorite. Your favorite.
Yeah, he's my favorite. Yeah, he's frightening.
There you go. Okay. Very good. Well, Dan, thank you so much for being on the show today. Where can our listeners and viewers go to find out more about you, more about your work, anything you have coming up?
Well, I don't really have a website. I'm on Facebook under Dan Madsen. They can find me on Twitter under the Dan Madsen, or on Instagram under Madsen8973. So those are the 3 platforms that I'm currently on, and that's where I post things about me or things about my past, or I find something cool about the fan clubs I did, or photos or pictures or memorabilia. I post there almost every day, so I'm always updating that, and that's probably the best place to try to find out what's happening with me and to communicate with me as well.
So thanks for that, Dan. We'll put those down in the show notes down below so people can find you and figure out all the cool places that you're going and things that you've got going on. So, hey, guys, if you haven't already, clicking the follow button here on YouTube is one of the most important things you can do to help our show continue to grow and get amazing guests like Dan Madsen here today to come and have these chats with us and talk nerdy with us. So please consider giving the show a follow. It helps more than we'll ever be able to tell you. And be sure to check out Dan's work as well. He's got some cool stuff. And we have barely even literally scratched the surface of all the cool things that Dan has done throughout his career and will still be doing throughout the rest of his career. So we're excited to see where that goes. So
Thanks,
Dan,
Tim.
again, thank you for being on the show. Have really appreciated our chat today.
Thanks, Tim. I enjoyed it. Let's do it again.
I would love to. There's so much more to talk about and nerd out about. So I am absolutely okay with that. So,
Good.
All right, guys, thank you so much. Thank you for paying attention and enjoying the FSF podcast. And may the force be with you as you continue to live long and prosper. Bye-bye.
Copyright 2025 FSF Podcast. Reference to any specific product or entity mentioned on this podcast does not constitute an endorsement or recommendation by FSF Podcast. The views expressed by guests are their own, and their appearance on the program does not imply an endorsement of them or any entity they represent. If you have any questions about this disclaimer, please contact us via email at info@fsfpodcast.com.